You think you can just bring that up here? My father's voice slammed into me as I gripped the returned mail tight. The rough edges of the returned mail pressed into my palm, its faded stamps whispering secrets I wasn't ready to hear. I stood alone in the hospital chapel, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the smell of antiseptic creeping under the door. My father wasn't actually there, not physically, but his voice echoed in my head, replaying the same accusation he'd thrown at me 100 times before. The mail barely weighed anything. 3 envelopes, maybe 2 ounces. But my hand shook holding them. I looked down at the bundle. 3 envelopes, all addressed to someone I'd barely been allowed to mention. All stamped, "Return to sender." All hidden behind the altar decorations at our church, tucked away like they'd never existed, like he'd never existed. My younger brother. The one my father erased from family photos, from Christmas cards, from memory itself. The one whose name made my mother's face go pale and my father's jaw clench. Tonight I had to decide if I'd keep carrying this burden alone or finally face the truth. The chapel was empty except for me and God, and I wasn't sure if either of us had answers. I'd come here after visiting my nephew in the ICU, my golden child brother's son, the one everyone prayed for, the one who'd pull through because God was good and our family was faithful. But what about the brother no one prayed for, the one my father had cast out 15 years ago and never spoke of again? I folded the mail carefully, knowing this was the moment I couldn't turn back. My hands trembled as I pressed the envelopes flat, feeling the raised ink of addresses that had been rejected, sent back, refused. Just like the person they were meant for, I whispered a prayer, half honest, half desperate. God, if you're listening, show me what to do with this. Show me if there's any hope for forgiveness here, for him, for my father, for me. God didn't answer out loud, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant beep of medical equipment down the hall. I thought about Jesus' parable in Luke 15, the prodigal son my father had preached a dozen times. The wayward son who came home to a father who ran to meet him, who threw a party, who killed the fattened calf. But what about the son whose letters were returned unopened? What about the father who wouldn't run? I stepped out of the chapel into the cold night, the mail burning in my hand. The wind bit at my face as I walked to my car, but I barely felt it. My mind was already rewinding to that afternoon, to the baby dedication ceremony where everything had started to unravel, where the perfect family portrait had cracked just enough for me to see what was hidden underneath. My father's voice rang out, praising my brother's family while his eyes cut me down. I stood in the back of the sanctuary, watching him hold my nephew, the baby we were dedicating to God, the one who'd spent his first 2 weeks in the NICU fighting for every breath. My father cradled him like he was made of glass and gold, his voice warm and tender as he prayed. Lord, bless this child. Bless his parents who have shown such faith, such strength. Bless this family who trusts in you. It was the same message from Matthew 6 he'd preached 100 times. Don't worry about tomorrow. Seek first God's kingdom. Easy words when you were already the favored child. I clutched the returned mail in my bag, its weight a silent reminder of what was hidden. I'd found it just that morning, tucked behind the altar while setting up for the ceremony. 3 letters, all addressed in my younger brother's handwriting. All returned. All dated from years ago when he was still trying to reach us, still hoping someone would answer. The ceremony made clear I was the outsider, the one left behind. My father's eyes swept over the congregation, landing on me for just a second, not with warmth, not with the tenderness he'd just shown my nephew. His look said, "You're here out of obligation. You're the one who can't seem to get it right. You're the one who asked too many questions." My sister-in-law stood beside my golden child brother, her hand resting on the baby's head as my father prayed. She looked radiant, exhausted but glowing with the kind of joy that comes from surviving something terrible and coming out whole. My brother had his arm around her, his face serious but peaceful. They were the picture-perfect family, the ones who did everything right, the ones who never questioned, never pushed back, never made my father uncomfortable. I forced a smile, swallowing the sting, but inside I bowed to find answers. Why were these letters here? Why had they been returned? Who sent them back? My father? My mother? Someone else in the church who thought they were protecting us from the black sheep, the brother who'd chosen sin over family? The ceremony ended with a chorus of amens and a rush of people congratulating my brother and his wife. I hung back, waiting for the crowd to thin. My father shook hands and accepted embraces, his pastoral smile never wavering. He was good at this, the public performance, the spiritual authority, the image of a godly man leading a godly family. But I'd seen the cracks, I'd lived in them. After the ceremony, I slipped away to search the church for the mail's origin. The sanctuary emptied slowly, people lingering to chat in the aisles and the lobby. I moved toward the back hallway, the one that led to the storage rooms and the small prep area behind the altar. My heart pounded as I pushed through the door, stepping into the dim space where communion supplies and seasonal decorations were kept. The bundle's torn edges peeked from behind the altar, like a secret begging to be found. I knelt down, my knees pressing into the worn carpet. The letters had been shoved behind a box of Easter lilies, fake ones, the kind we used every year because real ones were too expensive. I reached for them, my fingers brushing the rough paper. 3 envelopes, all the same size, all addressed in the same careful handwriting, my younger brother's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere, even after 15 years. I held the returned mail, its musty smell filling my nostrils, a tangible piece of the past. The stamps were old, the ink faded. The first envelope was dated 14 years ago, the second 12 years ago, the third 10 years ago. All of them marked, "Returned to sender" in red ink. All of them unopened. This discovery challenged everything I thought I knew about my family. I'd been told my younger brother had cut us off, that he'd chosen his lifestyle over his faith, over us, that he didn't want anything to do with the family anymore. But these letters told a different story. He'd tried to reach out. He'd written, he'd sent these back to the church, maybe hoping someone would see them, would read them, would care. And someone had sent them back. Someone had written, "Return to sender," and made sure they never reached him. Someone had hidden them here, behind fake flowers and forgotten decorations, where they'd gather dust and stay silent. I stuffed the mail into my coat, determined to uncover its story. My hands shook as I stood up, glancing around to make sure no one had followed me. The hallway was empty, the sound of conversation in the lobby muffled and distant. I felt like a thief stealing evidence from my own family. But I couldn't leave them here. I couldn't let them disappear again. I left the church quietly, heart pounding with questions. The drive home was a blur. I kept the letters in my coat pocket, my hand resting on them at every red light. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It should have been beautiful, but all I could think about was the handwriting on those envelopes and the red ink that had sent them back. Return to sender. As if my brother was junk mail, as if his words didn't matter, I pulled into my parents' driveway just as the streetlights flickered on. My mother's car was there, which meant my father was probably at the hospital with my brother and sister-in-law. I needed to talk to her alone. I needed to know if she knew about the letters, if she'd been the one to send them back, if she'd helped hide them. I walked up to the front door, my hand still gripping the letters in my pocket. I knocked, then let myself in. "Mom?" She was in the living room, sitting in her usual chair by the window, a cup of tea cooling on the side table. She looked up when I came in, her expression shifting from tired to wary in an instant. She knew. I could see it in her eyes. "Some things are better left alone," my mother whispered, eyes darting away. I pulled the letters from my coat and set them on the coffee table between us. The returned mail rested on the table between us, its creases sharp under the lamp's glow. "Mom, I found these, behind the altar." My voice was steady, but my heart was racing. She stared at the letters like they were a snake about to strike. Her hands tightened around her teacup, her knuckles going white. Where did you? How did you? They were hidden behind the Easter decorations. I sat down across from her, leaning forward. Mom, these are from him, from my brother. He tried to write to us. Someone sent them back. Her warning felt like a wall closing in, suffocating my search for truth. She set the teacup down with a shaky hand, her lips pressing into a thin line. Your father, he thought it was best. We couldn't have him disrupting everything, not after what he did, not after he chose that life. He chose to be honest about who he was, I said, my voice rising despite myself. He didn't choose to be cut off. He didn't choose to have his letters returned unopened. You don't understand, she said, her voice breaking. Your father is a pastor. We have a reputation. We have a church to lead. If people knew, if they found out. Found out what? That we're human? That our family isn't perfect? That we have a son who's gay and we threw him away like he didn't matter? The words hung in the air between us, sharp and true. My mother flinched, her eyes filling with tears. But she didn't argue. She didn't defend my father. She just looked at me with a mix of fear and resignation, like she'd been waiting for this moment for 15 years and dreading it just as long. I nodded silently but knew I couldn't stop now. I reached for the letters, pulling them back toward me. My mother watched, her face crumpling, but she didn't try to stop me. She just sat there, her hands folded in her lap, her shoulders slumped under the weight of years of silence. I need to know the truth, Mom, all of it, not just what Dad wants me to believe. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine. Then she sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to come from somewhere ancient and broken inside her. I don't know if you're ready for the truth. I don't know if any of us are. I gathered the mail and retreated to my room, heart heavy but resolute. I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of my bed, spreading the letters out in front of me. 3 envelopes. 14 years, 12 years, 10 years. Each one, a moment when my brother had reached out, had tried to bridge the gap, had hoped for something other than rejection. I picked up the oldest one, my fingers tracing the faded stamp. I wanted to open it. I wanted to read his words, to hear his voice again, even if only on paper. But something stopped me. These letters weren't meant for me. They were meant for my father, or maybe for all of us, but they'd been refused. Opening them felt like violating something that wasn't mine to take. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from my golden brother. Dad's staying at the hospital tonight. Mom okay? I stared at the message, then at the letters. My family was 3 miles away, gathered around a hospital bed, praying for the nephew everyone loved. But 15 years ago, they'd let another son disappear without a single prayer, without a single opened letter. I grabbed my laptop and opened it. If my brother was out there, I was going to find him. I typed his name into Facebook, my thumb hovering over the search button. Then I pressed it. You question my decisions? My father's glare cut sharper than any blade. The returned mail lay folded in my pocket, a quiet rebellion against his words. We sat around the family dining table 3 days after the baby dedication, the same table where we'd shared 1,000 Sunday dinners, the same chairs where I'd learned to pray before meals and keep my opinions to myself. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I'd come with questions my father didn't want to hear. I'm just asking why those letters were hidden, I said, keeping my voice level. Why they were sent back. My father set down his fork with deliberate precision, the small clink against the plate somehow louder than it should have been. This family doesn't air its dirty laundry, not at church, not at this table, and certainly not when your mother and I are dealing with your brother's crisis. My golden brother's crisis, his son fighting for life in the NICU, the grandson my father held like treasure, while another grandson, or maybe more than one, existed somewhere in the world, unacknowledged, unknown, erased. I felt the weight of his control pressing down, threatening to break me. My mother sat frozen at the other end of the table, her hands clutching her napkin, her eyes pleading with me to stop. My golden brother wasn't here. He was at the hospital with his wife and baby. It was just the three of us, and the silence felt heavy enough to crush. Dad, he tried to reach out. The letters prove nothing except that some people refuse to accept the consequences of their choices. My father's voice dropped to that cold, pastoral tone he used when delivering judgment from the pulpit. Romans 1 is clear about those who exchange the truth of God for a lie. Your brother made his choice. We made ours. I met his eyes steadily, refusing to shrink away this time. And what about Romans 8? About being adopted as God's children? About nothing separating us from the love of Christ? The flash of anger in his eyes told me I'd crossed a line. But for the first time, I didn't care about the line. I cared about the truth buried behind it. You will not lecture me on scripture in my own home, he said quietly, each word sharp as broken glass. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I'm not lecturing, I'm asking. If God doesn't cast us out, why do we? I didn't wait for his answer. After dinner, I sought counsel from someone unexpected. The church office was quiet at 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving only the hum of the HVAC system and the occasional creak of the old building settling. I knocked on Elder Harrison's door, half hoping he wouldn't be there, half desperate for him to answer. "Come in," his voice called from inside. Elder Harrison had been at our church for 20 years, longer than my father had been senior pastor. He'd known me since I was 12, had watched me grow up in the shadow of my father's ministry and my golden brother's success. He was one of the few people in the church who asked how I was doing and actually waited for an answer. "You're not alone in this," the elder said quietly, placing a steady hand on mine. I'd barely gotten through the story. The returned letters, the baby dedication, the dinner confrontation before my voice started shaking. He listened without interrupting, his face grave but kind. I pulled the returned mail from my bag, its crumpled edges a testament to hidden truths. The 3 envelopes sat on his desk between us, their faded stamps and red "Return to Sender" marks visible under the lamp's glow. "How long have you known about this?" I asked. He sighed, a deep sound that seemed to carry years of regret. "I knew your father and your younger brother had a falling out. I knew it was difficult. But I didn't know about these letters." He touched one of the envelopes gently like it might break. "I didn't know he'd tried to come back." For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope beyond my isolation. Someone believed me. Someone saw what I saw, that returning letters unopened wasn't just harsh, it was cruel. It was erasure. "What should I do?" I asked. Elder Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "You need more than suspicions and returned mail. If you're going to confront this, and I think you should, you need to understand the full scope of what happened. Talk to people who were here back then. Look for records, church directory listings, budget committee notes, anything that might show what your father doesn't want found." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "But be prepared. The truth often costs more than we expect to pay. Your father is a proud man. When pride is challenged, it fights back." I resolved to gather more evidence before confronting my father. The thought terrified me, but staying silent felt worse, like being complicit in the erasure. That night, I returned to the hospital chapel to pray for strength. The chapel was empty again, lit only by the small lamp near the altar and the street lights filtering through the stained glass. It was past midnight. The hospital corridors were quiet except for the occasional page overhead and the soft footsteps of night shift nurses. I'd driven here after leaving Elder Harrison's office, too wired to sleep, too afraid to stop moving. My hands trembled as I clutched the return mail, whispering a prayer for courage. The paper's rough texture grounded me in the quiet chapel stillness. I spread the letters out on the pew beside me, studying the postmarks, the addresses, the handwriting I remembered from birthday cards and school notes years ago. "God, I don't know what I'm doing," I whispered. I don't know if this is right or if I'm just making everything worse. I wrestled with the bitterness threatening to consume me. Every time I thought about my father holding my nephew with such tenderness, I thought about my younger brother, somewhere out there, maybe with children of his own that my father would never know, would never hold. The injustice of it burned. But underneath the anger was something else. Fear. What if I destroyed our family trying to fix it? What if exposing this truth shattered the fragile peace we'd built around our collective silence? I picked up my phone and opened my Bible app to 2 Corinthians 12. Paul's words about weakness and grace, about God's power being made perfect in our insufficiency. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. I asked God for grace to forgive, even if it meant pain. Not the cheap kind of forgiveness that pretends nothing happened, the kind that sees the wound clearly and still chooses love, the kind that might cost me everything. Dawn broke as I left the chapel. I pulled out my phone and texted Elder Harrison. I need to search the church archives. Can you get me access? His reply came 30 seconds later. Yes. Come tomorrow during your lunch break. I'll make sure you're not disturbed. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of searching and second-guessing. I started in the church office during lunch breaks, pulling old directories from the filing cabinets in the copy room. I found my brother's name listed in the 2008 directory, David Miller, college student living at home. By 2010, his name was gone, erased as cleanly as if he'd never existed. I sifted through the papers, fragments that didn't add up, but hinted at a painful truth. Youth group expenses. A missions trip to Mexico in 2009, his name was on the participant list. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands shaking every time I heard footsteps in the hallway. Then I found the college fund statement, closed refund to general fund. My parents had taken back his college money. I nearly dropped the paper. Someone knocked on the copy room door. Just printing, I called out, my voice too high. I shoved the file back into the cabinet and grabbed a random bulletin from the printer. When I opened the door, it was just a church secretary looking for staplers. But my heart didn't stop racing for an hour. The return mail was the first piece. Now I held more, each document adding weight to a truth I was almost afraid to name. Copies of old church bulletins where David's name appeared in prayer requests until it didn't. Budget reports. Directory pages. All evidence of erasure. The weight of evidence grew heavier, and so did my fear. Each new piece made the picture worse. Someone had been thorough removing him from directories, closing his college fund, erasing him from bulletins. But was it my father, my mother? Someone else trying to protect the family? I didn't know yet, but I was going to find out. I debated whether to confront my father or protect the fragile peace. Part of me wanted to shove all of this back in the filing cabinets and pretend I'd never looked. Part of me wanted to march into his office and demand answers, but I knew neither approach would work. My father would deny everything or justify it with scripture. I needed witnesses. I needed accountability. The unexpected ally's words echoed, urging me toward courage. Elder Harrison had been clear. If I was going to do this, I needed to do it right. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in pursuit of truth and restoration. I called him Tuesday morning. I found things. Church records, the college fund. I have proof. Then it's time, he said quietly. I'll arrange a meeting with the elder board. Friday night. Friday night. 3 days away. My father would be there. So would 4 other elders, men who'd known our family for decades, men who might believe me or might not. I spent those 3 days in a fog of anxiety and prayer. My mother knew something was wrong. She kept asking if I was sick, if I needed to talk. I couldn't tell her. If I did, she'd tell my father, and he'd find a way to stop the meeting or control the narrative. I'd seen him do it before. That pastoral authority that could redirect any conversation, reframe any question, make doubt sound like disloyalty. Thursday night, I barely slept. I kept rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd present the evidence, how I'd respond when my father inevitably turned it around on me. Would they believe me? Would they care? Or would they see me as the troublemaker, the daughter who couldn't let go of the past, who couldn't forgive? Friday evening came too fast and too slow at the same time. I arrived at the church at 7 o'clock, my bag heavy with copies of everything I'd found. The meeting room was on the second floor, a small space with a long table and tall windows that overlooked the parking lot. I could see my father's car already there. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. The door was open. 5 men sat around the table, my father at the head, Elder Harrison to his right, and 3 other elders I knew by name but not well. They all looked up when I walked in. "Thank you for coming," Elder Harrison said gently. "Please sit down." I took the empty chair across from my father. His face was unreadable, that pastoral mask he wore so well, but his eyes were angry. I laid the returned mail and receipts on the table, my voice steady despite the room's tension. My hands shook as I spread out the 3 letters, the church directory copies, the budget records, the canceled college fund statement. The bundle's worn edges and faded ink spoke louder than words ever could. 15 years ago, my youngest brother David left home, I began. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, too loud, too clear. We were told he'd chosen to cut ties with the family, that he wanted nothing to do with us anymore, that he'd rejected God and chosen sin. I pushed the return letters forward, but that wasn't true. These letters prove he tried to reach out. Someone sent them back unopened. Someone marked them, returned to sender, and hid them behind the altar decorations. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Elder Harrison nodded at me to continue. I found more than letters. I pushed the directory pages across the table. His name appears in the 208th directory. By 2010, it's gone, completely erased. That doesn't prove. My father started. I slapped the college fund statement down in front of him. His college money, taken back and redistributed to the general fund. He was 20 years old, Dad, still trying to finish school. "This is inappropriate," my father said, his voice cold and controlled. "Family matters should it be?" "This isn't just family," I interrupted, my voice stronger now. "This is about a young man who was part of this church, who grew up here, who served in youth group and went on mission trips, who tried to come back and was refused." I looked around the table, meeting each elder's eyes. "I found him online. Last week. He's alive. He lives in Seattle. He has a partner. They've been together for 12 years. He works as a social worker helping homeless kids." The room went silent. One of the elders, Tom, cleared his throat. Does David know you've been looking for him?" "No," I admitted. "I didn't reach out yet. I wanted to understand what happened first. I wanted to know the truth. I chose honesty and grace, ready to face whatever came next." I turned to my father, feeling tears burn behind my eyes, but refusing to let them fall. "Dad, I know this is hard. I know you thought you were protecting the church, protecting the family, but David is your son? He deserved better than silence. He deserved better than erasure." My father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping back. For a moment I thought he might leave, but he didn't. He just stood there, his hands gripping the back of his chair, his face pale with rage and something else, something that looked almost like fear. The room fell silent, eyes fixed on my father's reaction. "This is a lie!" my father spat, eyes blazing with fury and fear. I held the returned mail tightly, a silent witness to his words. The evidence was spread across the table between us. The letters, the directory pages, the college fund statement. The other elders sat frozen, their eyes darting between my father and the documents. "Dad!" I started. "No." He slammed his palm on the table, making everyone jump. "This is a distortion, a manipulation. You've taken fragments and created a narrative that simply isn't true." His denial threatened to undo everything I'd risked. For a moment I felt 15 years old again, small and powerless under his certainty. But I wasn't 15 anymore, and I wasn't alone. Elder Harrison picked up one of the returned letters, studying the postmark. Pastor Miller, this is dated 12 years ago, and it's addressed to you at the church. Can you explain why it was marked Return to Sender? I never saw these letters, my father said, his voice clipped. If they existed, someone else must have. The handwriting on the Return to Sender mark, I interrupted quietly. It matches the notes you used to leave on my school papers, the way you make your R's, the slant of the S. The room went completely silent. I stood firm, refusing to be silenced or shamed again. I'm not here to destroy you, Dad. I'm here because David deserves better than being erased. He deserved a father who would at least read his letters. My father's face went pale, then red. You have no idea what it was like. The shame he brought on this family, the questions from the congregation, the whispers. He was 20 years old, I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay steady. He was your son. He chose his path, my father said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. He sounded tired now, old in a way I'd never noticed before. Elder Tom cleared his throat. I think we need to take a break. This is a lot to process. But Elder Harrison shook his head. No, I think we need to address this now. Pastor Miller, did you or did you not send these letters back unopened? The silence stretched so long I could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. My father's hands gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. I thought I was protecting the church, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Protecting you. Protecting your mother. He'd made his choice, and I thought silence was the kindest option for everyone. Silence isn't kindness, I said, it's erasure. The elders murmured among themselves, the balance of power shifting. I watched my father's certainty crumble, piece by piece. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt sad. The meeting ended 20 minutes later with no clear resolution, just a promise to reconvene in a week after everyone had time to pray and think. My father left without looking at me. Elder Harrison walked me to my car. That took real courage, he said. Your father needed to hear it even if he didn't want to. The question now is, what comes next? I didn't have an answer. 3 days later, I sat in my apartment staring at my phone. I'd found David on social media, confirmed it was really him from his photos. Older now, his face carrying 15 years of life I'd missed. But I still hadn't reached out. What would I even say? Sorry, our father erased you, but I found your letters. I closed the door gently behind me, feeling the weight of years lift slightly. The returned mail lay folded on the table, a symbol of past wounds now faced. I'd brought them home from the church meeting, unable to leave them there. They felt like evidence that needed protecting, or maybe just memories I wasn't ready to release. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long moment. We hadn't spoken since the elder meeting. I'd heard through my golden brother that she was upset, that my father had barely spoken to anyone all weekend, that the church elders had asked him to take a temporary leave while they reviewed the situation. I typed back, yes. Coffee tomorrow? Her response came immediately, 11 a.m., the usual place. The next morning, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, my stomach in knots. When my mother walked in, she looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched under her coat. We ordered her usual decaf, my usual latte, and sat in the corner booth by the window. I'm angry with you, she said, not looking at me. I nodded. I know. You hurt your father deeply. The elders are talking about asking him to step down. Do you know what that would do to him? To us? I chose peace over bitterness, grace over revenge. I took a deep breath. Mom, I know this is hard. But David tried to reach us for years. And Dad sent every letter back unopened. That's not my fault. That's not David's fault. That's Dad's choice. You don't understand the pressure he was under, she said, her voice rising slightly. The congregation expected him to be perfect, I finished. To have a perfect family with perfect children who never struggled or questioned or turned out different than expected. She looked down at her coffee cup, her fingers trembling slightly around it. Mom, I love Dad, but I can't pretend this is okay. David deserved better. And honestly, so did I. So did you. We all deserved a family where love wasn't conditional on being perfect. She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. I wanted to respond to the letters. I begged your father to at least read them. But he said it would only make things harder, that it was better to make a clean break. But it wasn't clean, I said gently. It was just broken. My mother started crying, silent tears running down her face. I reached across the table and took her hand. We sat like that for several minutes, my mother's hand cold and small in mine, the espresso machine hissing behind the counter, while we held on to each other in the wreckage of our family silence. I embraced a new identity, not defined by my father's approval. That afternoon, sitting in my apartment, I finally opened my Bible to Romans 8, the verses my pastor, not my father, but the visiting pastor who'd preached last month had talked about. Verses about being adopted as children of God, about nothing separating us from His love. The Spirit you receive does not make you slaves, so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by Him we cry, Abba, Fathers. Romans chapter 8, verse 15. I'd spent my whole life trying to earn my earthly father's approval, believing that God's love worked the same way, conditional, performance-based, easily lost. But this verse said something different. It said I was already adopted, already loved, not because I was perfect or obedient or kept the family secrets, but because of grace. I reached for my Bible, ready to walk this new path. I picked up my phone and opened Facebook, found David's profile again, stared at his latest post, a photo of him and his partner at Pike Place Market in Seattle, both of them laughing at something off camera. I clicked message and typed, Hi David, this is your sister. I know it's been 15 years. I know you have no reason to respond, but I found your letters, the ones you sent to Dad at the church. I wanted you to know someone finally read them, someone finally cared. I'm so sorry it took this long. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. 2 days passed with no response. I tried not to check my messages every 5 minutes. I tried to accept that maybe David had moved on, that maybe he didn't want to reconnect with a family that had erased him. I couldn't blame him if that was true. On the third day, a message notification appeared. I never thought anyone from the family would reach out. I'm not sure what to say. I'm not sure I'm ready to talk yet, but thank you for reading them. Thank you for caring. I read it 3 times, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't forgiveness or restoration or any of the neat endings I'd hoped for. It was just acknowledgement, just the beginning of a conversation that might take years to unfold, if it unfolded at all. But it was something. It was a start. 4 weeks after the elder meeting, I ran into my father at the church. I'd been avoiding Sunday services, going to a different church across town where no one knew my story. But I needed to pick up some books I'd left in the Sunday school room, and I thought the building would be empty on a Thursday afternoon. My father's eyes met mine, softer this time, uncertain but present. The return mail was gone, but its echoes lingered between us. We stood in the hallway, neither of us quite sure what to say. The elders asked me to take a sabbatical, he said finally. 3 months, to reflect, to seek counsel. I nodded. I heard. I've been meeting with a therapist, a Christian counselor. Elder Harrison recommended her. He paused, looking uncomfortable. She's helping me understand some things about control, about fear, about my father and how he raised me. I sensed a fragile bridge forming, built on grace, not perfection. That's good, Dad. That's really good. I read the letters, he said quietly, the ones David sent. Elder Harrison kept copies. I finally read them. My throat tightened. What did they say? They said he missed us, that he wanted to come home for Christmas, that he was scared and lonely and hoping we'd still love him even though he was gay. My father's voice cracked. They said he still believed in God, that he still prayed, that he just wanted his family back. We stood in silence, the weight of 15 years of returned letters pressing down on both of us. I was wrong, my father said, and it sounded like the words cost him everything to speak. I was wrong to send them back, wrong to erase him, wrong to choose my reputation over my son. I chose to extend forgiveness without forgetting the past. I appreciate you saying that. But you need to say it to David, not to me. He nodded slowly. I don't know if he'll listen. I don't know if he should. Maybe he will, maybe he won't, but he deserves to hear it. My father looked at me with something like respect in his eyes, something I wasn't sure I'd ever seen before. When did you get so wise? When I stopped trying to earn your approval, I said, and it wasn't meant to be cruel, just honest. He flinched, but he didn't argue. We parted with a nod, both changed but still healing. I walked to my car with my books, feeling lighter than I had in months. The road ahead was still unclear. I didn't know if David would ever speak to my father, didn't know if our family would ever truly heal. But I knew I'd done the right thing. I knew I'd chosen truth over silence. And that was enough. My phone buzzed with the text from David. Mom called yesterday. We talked for an hour. I sat down at my kitchen table, the morning light filtering through the lace curtains, and opened my Bible. 3 months had passed since the elder meeting. The return mail was tucked away in my closet now. I didn't need to see it every day anymore. I'd been texting with David once a week, nothing deep, just small updates. He told me about his work with homeless youth. I told him about my job, about the new church I'd been attending. We were careful with each other, like people learning to walk on ice, not sure yet if it would hold our weight. I felt a new peace settling in my heart, fragile but real. Not the kind of peace that meant everything was fixed or resolved. The kind that meant I could live with the uncertainty, with the slow work of healing, with relationships that might never be what I hoped but could still be something. I turned to Romans 8 again, reading verses 15 through 17 out loud to the empty room. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ. I chose to walk forward, defined by grace, not rejection. I was learning what it meant to be a daughter of God, not just my earthly father's daughter. Learning that my identity wasn't tied to whether my father approved of me, or whether my family ever fully healed. I was loved. I was chosen. I was enough. Not because I'd done everything right, but because grace doesn't depend on perfection. My phone buzzed. A message from David. I called Mom yesterday. We talked for an hour. It was hard, but good. Thank you for starting this, for being brave enough to break the silence. I closed the book gently, ready to face whatever came next. The story wasn't over. Healing would take years, maybe a lifetime. My father might never fully change. David might never fully trust us again. But we were talking. We were trying. And that felt like grace. Not the easy kind, but the real kind that shows up in the mess. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in any part of it, the silenced child, the erased sibling, the one carrying family secrets that feel too heavy to speak, I want you to know something. Telling the truth shattered my family's perfect image. It cost me my father's approval, maybe forever. 15 years of silence had nearly erased my brother. I couldn't let that stand. If you're carrying a family secret that's crushing you, I understand why you're afraid to speak. I was terrified too, but I'd rather live in the honest mess than in a beautiful lie. We're talking now. Me, David, even my father. Slow, careful, no guarantees, but we're trying, and that's more than we had when everything was perfect. You are not defined by your family's dysfunction or by the approval you never received. You are a child of God, adopted into His family, loved with a love that doesn't depend on your performance or your perfection. That's what I'm learning anyway. One day at a time. One hard conversation at a time. One brother gradually coming home, one text at a time.